Part 4 would have been our anniversary today. It's been 6 years now, but I remember our first anniversary. We made plans to go to a hill station, but I fell ill at the last moment, so we had to stay home. I felt like I ruined our anniversary but did my best to make it an enjoyable day nonetheless. I secretly ordered a little anniversary cake for the occasion, took out my old Xbox and we played games on it the whole day. We spent a cozy intimate day in each other's arms, and I felt like the luckiest guy on the planet. She convinced me to sleep early that night because I was still a little bit sick. I thanked her and told her that I enjoyed the day, and she told me she did too, and after that I fell asleep. 2 months later, D-Day happened. I found what they talked about after I fell asleep that night. She was telling him she couldn't wait for the day to be over so they can have fun together. They sexted for 4 hours, well past midnight, and they were both entirely ecstatic because they got more time that night since I fell asleep early. This last month I thought we were doing really good on the path to reconciling, with the two of us sleeping in the same room, and our sex life resuming and becoming better with time. I thought I was past those days when I couldn't sleep at night with my head full of spiraling thoughts. Even the so-called triggers were happening less often. Tonight, it's all happening again. I am back in the guest bedroom, and I think I might just throw up. I can't face her. I can't bear to be in the same room with her, but I'm also terrified about leaving her alone in her room tonight. She tried to convince me to stay in the bedroom, to let her hold my hand and see if I can fall asleep that way. She even offered to leave the house if it helps. But there's nothing she can do to make this better. She's already done what she's done. Sometimes I think how long I will suffer this way. It's been 5 years, it still hurts the exact same way. Will it be like this forever? The bad days are becoming less frequent, and therapy helps with reducing my triggers and anger management. But when something like this happens, and it all comes back, I feel like all that therapy and all that time in between goes out the window, and I'm teleported back to the hurt I felt on D-Day again. Will it always hurt so much? Does it ever get better? Update: WW and her shame. Lots of shame. D-Day was 5 years ago. She was plenty regretful and guilty about her affair and did all the right things initially, but I felt that I just couldn't get over it, so I decided to divorce her within a month after finding out. 5 years later we reconnected and now trying to reconcile. This divorce was obviously a major turning point in my own life, but unknown to me it was also deeply traumatic for her. She cut off all her friends from her life because they encouraged her affair when it was happening. Neither of us have any family to rely on. Thankfully, I had a lot of people unexpectedly support and stand by me during this lowest period of my life. I also had 2 of my lifelong best friends who also supported me in everything. She, on the other hand, sank in her shame and pushed away everyone from her life. She was also completely and truly alone for the first time in her life. She's admitted to doing some really dark things during this period, like staring at walls for hours, filling up entire notebooks by rewriting "I'm sorry" over and over, not sleeping for 48 hours straight. I also know that she didn't show up to work at all and was fired after a few weeks. In this period of turmoil, she somehow found her way to an ashram, which, in case you don't know, is apparently a place of spiritual learning. She basically poured her heart out in front of a counselor there and told them that she hated who she was and she wanted to be a better person. Now, they did try to help her in their own way, I'll give them that. But you have to keep in mind that the counselors here are not trained in psychology but in religion and philosophy. A lot of their views on mental health are not aligned with our current scientific understanding of psychology, and their ways and methods of healing are unconventional to say the least. They had some sort of support group for sexually dysfunctional people, which included sex addicts, porn addicts, and even a convicted rapist. They convinced her that unless she can confess everything about her affair down to the smallest detail in front of a room full of these people, it means she still doesn't want to part with her memories, and they still hold value to her. She almost fainted the first time she tried it, but nobody helped her, and they made her do it again the next day. When she asked for help with painful and traumatic flashbacks of her affair, she was given meditation training and asked to go through her entire affair in her head. They told her the day she went through it all without breaking down, she will have conquered her intrusive thoughts. She did this every day for 6 months before succeeding once. She admitted that it made her want to throw up every time, so eventually she started doing it first thing in the morning so there would be nothing in her stomach to throw up. There's lots of examples of this sort of healing therapy and personality development exercises they advocated that I can honestly go on and on about, but the crux of it is that they all were incredibly punishing towards her and served only to further increase her shame towards her actions. I have never heard of shame being used to make someone a better person. Isn't shame an undesirable thing that hinders progress? I think forcing her to relive her shame over and over that way was harmful to her, and is against every principle of recovery and healing that I have read about. I see in her every action how much enormous shame she still carries and how she almost talks about it like her shame is a positive thing. I mean, this is someone who was so affected by watching a movie scene involving infidelity that she couldn't look in my eyes for the rest of the day, who still feels so ashamed and guilty of her actions that she still can't bring herself to say that she wants me to be in a monogamous relationship with her only and keeps offering hall passes, even though deep down she and I both know it's not what she wants. What really bugs me is how much of her remorse is rooted in this shame. I can't even separate the two. She has gone above and beyond in every single one of her actions and reactions during reconciliation. On my request, she is now in conversation with her therapist about her toxic levels of shame, and hopefully she will be able to deal with all that in a healthy manner. But selfishly, I also feel scared after I asked her to talk to her therapist. What if she was just with me because her overwhelming shame made her unable to move on? What if she finds more healthy outlets of shame and decides the hard work of reconciliation is just not worth it anymore? What if her remorse is so deeply rooted in her shame that she stops being remorseful once she really resolves it in therapy? I know it's selfish and cruel to think this way, but I really can't help it. Update: the end goal of my reconciliation. A positive update. You can visit my profile. But my D-Day was almost 6 years ago, and I almost immediately divorced her. Last year we reconnected and now trying to build a new relationship. This all happened over the course of the last few days. We've been reconciling very well, as you can probably tell from the smaller number of posts I make nowadays. Most days I can classify as good and I don't feel like there's a hole in my chest. Triggers happen, but now we're both getting better at dealing with them as they happen. She's also a great partner who always puts me first, has never shied away from hard conversation, and has shown immense patience and empathy so far. She's also learning to not let her shame bear her down and lead her to destructive decisions. Initially, I surmised the goal of reconciliation will be to eventually remarry her and start a family if all goes well. There is no pressure from her side at all. She did say when we were just starting out that she eventually wants to have kids with me, but whether I want to marry her or not is completely my choice. I recently talked about this with her again, because lately I've been struggling with the idea of marrying again. She was understanding and calm and reiterated that if I chose not to remarry, she will be completely fine with it and she will not force me to make any decision. Maybe I'll change my mind later, in fact it is a high possibility. But the way my first marriage turned out to be a lie. The best moments where I was most happy were also the periods where she was most heavily engaged in her affair. Even on our marriage day itself, they were chatting 24/7. They were in a different world of their own where the marriage was not even happening. The thought of marrying her again is just stressful and anxiety-inducing. I know it's still too soon, but my entire approach to reconciliation was keeping marriage as the end goal. I also recognize my story is different from a lot of people here, in that most people remained married to their WW, so remarrying or not was not a choice for most people. I think it is time for me to acknowledge that maybe remarrying shouldn't be the end goal. Maybe we could be just as happy being boyfriend and girlfriend as we would have been being husband and wife. The fact that it is ultimately completely my choice, and my partner is understanding enough to grant this choice to me, gives me a kind of reassurance that I can't explain with words, like I'm getting back some control of my life. After having this discussion with her, I told her I'm starting to actually see a future with her, and I'm starting to even look forward to it. Even though we don't end up marrying, I know I'll be happy with her regardless of what labels we stick to our relationship. She was overjoyed to hear this and said she knows she'll be most happy with me as well. I'm glad we talked this out because I had been unnecessarily focusing on remarriage as the end goal. And now with the focus shifted towards having a better relationship and no pressure to do anything I don't really want to do, we can focus on building a new relationship from the ground up. D-Day anniversary is just around the corner and I'm sure that day is going to suck the soul out of me. But I'm glad for days like this that reaffirm that things will be better eventually. Reader comment: you may be projecting your fears on her. From her choice of healing methods to you wanting her to see a therapist. Are you seeing a therapist because I think it will be beneficial for you? I'm not sure you have healed or dealt with the affair. It's more like you moved on out of sight, out of mind, and that just won't work. I'm not saying she doesn't have demons to deal with, but group discussion isn't inherently bad. They can be freeing and a step to forgiving yourself. Original poster: I am in therapy, yes. I don't mind a good group discussion, but I do take issue with how they insisted she confess the details of her affair, and how she was expected to just get back up on her own after she broke down in front of that crowd and nobody even checked up on her from what she told me. It just sounds cruel instead of healing, and it's not like it helped her much either considering how big of a roadblock her shame is to our reconciliation. Edit. I also seem to remember her telling me that in her subsequent sessions with that group, she could never open up again to the degree that she wanted because the moment she tried to speak they would look at her and she would feel so ashamed that she couldn't even form words. Clearly their way of group discussion didn't achieve whatever they thought it would have achieved. But that's not the point of this post. I admit that I am not particularly fond of institutions that don't follow hard scientifically proven methods because of certain bad past experiences with such institutions. I admit I am biased against them. But what happened, happened. This is not really what the post was about. This post was more about my insecurities and confusions regarding the intense amount of shame that she carries, and the worry that her shame will be a barrier to reconciliation, regardless of where this shame came from and whether this ashram had any role to play in it. Reader comment, I can understand you. I was 2 years out and nothing had gotten better for my relationship with WH. It just wasn't the same years later despite having been together so long. I think what you are feeling is normal for being betrayed by someone you love and trusted. Your whole world was turned upside down, and I think your mind tries to protect you from getting hurt again. Like when people disassociate to forget bad things, our mind will send reminders to protect ourselves that last time this happened you were destroyed, let's not let our guard down. For me, personally, I never felt truly safe from getting emotionally blindsided with WH. Living in anxiety wasn't for me. I hope you find some contentment with her. I'll be rooting for you, Opus. Reader comment, you're confused because you think that infidelity is caused by a bad primary relationship. I don't blame you for that since that seems to be what most people think. But the truth is that this is not always the case. In fact, more often than not the cheating is actually a coping mechanism for an underlying psychological issue that the WS has not addressed. I think it can be hard to get to this understanding for a variety of reasons. First off, WS may not even be aware of exactly what their issue is even if they are vaguely aware that they were using the affair to cope, and BS will almost always have a difficult time of understanding it from their perspective unless they happen to be trained in psychology. To them it will just look like WS all of a sudden started to resent them and not care about them, without understanding that there are a variety of mental self-defense mechanisms that are kicking in for WS when they begin their affair. I'm going to give you some insight here into a question you asked that I feel I can answer because I also had a similar mental problem to your wife in this regard. Greater than, and how can I forget her feeling intimidated at having to discuss her needs with me but somehow didn't feel intimidated to step out of marriage. Isn't that a more daring thing to do? Or am I missing something? Yes, you are potentially missing something very important. I myself had a crippling fear of intimacy and vulnerability that manifested itself in an insecure attachment style called dismissive attachment disorder. To understand how this manifested, when I was a small child my parents divorced and my mother remarried and had 2 more children. Those children were extremely favored in our household, and one summer when I was 5, I was allowed to visit my grandparents. Anyway, I was so traumatized by my living situation that I cried and cried when it was time for me to go home, and my mother's solution was to basically leave me at my grandparents for good. She never called me, never sent me a card for my birthday, no contact at all. It was like I didn't exist. I was 5 years old. This basically created a little monster that desperately craved affection and validation and emotional intimacy from people I cared about, but at the same time was absolutely terrified of being hurt by them and in a panic could not make myself emotionally vulnerable. The paradox here is that the more I cared about someone, the less I was able to be emotionally intimate with them. It was frankly too scary. I would tell myself I would rather suffer with whatever unhappiness I had than risk emotional rejection. And if there was going to be any rejection going on, then I was going to be the person to do it first. The thing about this is it's a coping mechanism, and a self-destructive one as well, because it caused me to torpedo several relationships in my life and almost my marriage. And to make it even worse, with this kind of mental hang-up, I started to go in the opposite direction of my partners. I would talk to other people and be fun and flirty and feign intimacy. But that's all it was, a facade, a fake. It was literally playing acting because I did not care about them at all, so there is zero emotional risk to me of rejection. Essentially, I was using other people and these interactions to medicate my anxiety and pain. I'm not saying your wife is me, but I am saying that the behavior she is exhibiting can be rationally explained in a way that makes it comprehensible how someone can do things that are at cross purpose to their actual feelings. They don't necessarily want to do these things, but they are afraid of doing the things that might help the situation in a healthy way. So they reach for bad coping mechanisms as a way of handling the anxiety they are feeling. One of the real tragedies of the modern relationship situation is that we have all of this empirical evidence and research on a variety of subjects like attachment disorders and coping mechanisms down to the point where once you are familiar with the behaviors you can almost predict the future like a fortune teller. But people are so incredibly unaware of them. I don't think everyone needs to be a psychiatrist, but there are some real simple foundational things in relationships and common disorders that everyone really ought to be aware of. Maybe even a class on relationships in high school might be beneficial. I don't know, but ever since I started working on my problems, I've found a lot of easily comprehensible information that explains how and why both me and my wife act the way we do. It's been of immense help to us in our relationship. To not sound cliché, is frankly leaps and bounds better now than it was for the 3 years prior to DD. But we are the lucky ones that managed to both want to work on it and got the support we needed. Not everyone does. So, my advice to you is to go out and start comprehending stuff. There's no reason why your wife's behavior should be confusing. It's just that you don't have access to the right knowledge yet, and the nice thing about having this knowledge is that it makes a lot of things clear, and makes it easier to make decisions because you feel like you understand what is going on. My suggestion would be to start with reading up on attachment styles and then go from there. Ask questions, describe your wife's behavior and ask for opinions. Get into therapy even if you can afford it. The point is, none of us ever got any proper education on relationships other than what we observed firsthand. At best, this created a partial picture without any of the understanding of what lies beneath, and at worst it influenced us to act in ways that are harmful to ourselves and others. Then you throw in our own mistakes, the mistakes of other people, the hurt and the anxiety, and it's no wonder we can't figure out what to do half the time. It doesn't have to be that way. Regardless of what happens with your wife and you, being a bit educated on these subjects is going to benefit you in the long run and give you an edge towards having the kind of successful relationship you want. I deeply encourage you to explore this. Best of luck.